Hi, I'm Gary Young.
And I'm Carys.
Every week, Carys and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are overreported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not talked about enough.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar. Hi, Gary. Happy episode. A lot of stuff happened since we last spoke. Some big news.
A lot of things.
First is I hear on the grapevine that you got a podcast freebie.
I did. I want to thank the man from Liverpool. I didn't hear his name. I'm not sure he told it to me. He has tattoos and he was bigger than me. Are you Gary? He said. I want to buy you a pint. This is in central London. I love your podcast. And then he bought me the pint and he left me the pint and then he went off into central London. It was a lovely experience. And thank you.
Thank you, Liverpudlian listener. I live in East London. If you're ever there and you want to buy me a pint, I'll happily receive it. Who says this isn't a glamorous gig, Gary?
Exactly.
Anything you want to talk to me about before we do our overs and our unders?
Well, it was quite a week. The attempted assassination of Donald Trump, the King's speech. I'm not quite used to saying that yet.
Yeah, it's like when you see his face on the notes, it's like, I think it should be a woman. I don't know. It's just weird.
Yeah, I always think of the film with Colin Firth, and then I always think...
Bloody great film.
Yeah, it is a good film. But I also think, well, we shouldn't have a monarchy anyway, so it shouldn't really matter whether it's a king or a queen. It should just be the speech.
True that. So you're not into the pomp and ceremony, black rod,
it's
hostages.
It's just medieval bling, isn't it, really? It's... It is. It's
yeah. I mean, I like a bit of gaudy. I like a bit of bling, but I'm with you on that. The commentators get a bit too sort of breathy and excited about it all.
They do.
But rail nationalisation, whoop whoop, that was a good one.
But not the 2-cap. Those are minus whoops.
I didn't think we were going to get that.
And the resignation of Vaughan Gething, the First Minister of Wales. It's an interesting thing that Starmer does here because he congratulated Vaughan Gething for being the first black leader of... Well, it does fit... Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, it's like he's congratulating people for being black in high places. I guess that's not a crazy thing. Although it sits weird out of his mouth, I've got to tell you.
Yeah, we had it because this came up in one of the over-under group chats of like, I found it to be weird and awkward, but someone else... I mean... I think acknowledging that it is harder and it's different to do it as a person of colour or be the first person of colour, like that's true. He's never managed it deftly enough.
It feels like that their achievement is being black. There was this moment, interestingly, where the UK Prime Minister, First Minister of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, there was not a white man among them. And just like that, we're down to one white lady.
I'm going to be real with you, Gary. Something else has been sitting a bit heavier with me this week. I'm going to lower the tone ever so slightly. Stormzy and Maya Jama broke up.
Oh, did they again?
Yeah, but like, do you know what? And they did it in a classy way. Take note, Gwyneth Paltrow. They basically both posted statements to social media being like, we met when we were really young, we fell madly in love, it didn't work out. Got back together, we gave it a go and like hasn't worked out this time, but we still really care about each other and we like need a bit of space and privacy. And obviously I don't know them, it's their business, but I just felt sad, they're a bit of a golden couple, they were couple goals. So I've been sad about that. I've been sad about Vaughan and, other things, but just felt like a shame.
I have met Stormzy a few times. I've interviewed him twice and he's a lovely guy. Very clever and really on a journey in terms of his emotional self-awareness. And I know that where he was when I last interviewed him, which would have been a year and a half ago, he's looking to settle down. He's been on this journey about what it means to be a man and so on. So I was really pleased to hear that they had got back together again, just because he was the part of that relationship that I knew somewhat, and I think it was quite important to him. But with the best will in the world, these things don't work out. And they would have been, I think, Black Britain's first couple.
Well, that's what I mean. I think if you're not really into the royal family, you look for your sort of royal couples, or your like, you know, high profile power couples more in the world of celebrity. And I love the visuals of it, but obviously that's not a reason for anyone to stay together, that it makes me feel happy when I see a picture of them. But yeah, that was a non-political thing that happened this week. I'm very sad about. We've got some listener mail that we're going to read before we jump into the podcast.
Well, this is from Emma, an email. Emma says, I just wanted to thank you for your latest episode. As someone on the left, I've been incredibly down recently, but it was so uplifting to hear you both say the things that needed to be said. It was far superior to anything I've read in the mainstream media since the general election, which essentially has been a smug fest.
That's such a good word, Emma, smug fest.
Yes, but thank you. Thank you very much. And I agree. We are we are better than the mainstream media.
Come on, careful, Gary. It's becoming a smug fest.
I have a little smug fest all to myself. And you can email us, as Emma did, info@overunderpod.com. We'd love to hear from you.
And we have a Patreon page, which is a way that you can support us financially. We've got the Wokerati package, which is about £3 a month, the Prosecco Socialist package, £10 a month, or you can be an ultimate comrade and give us £50 a month. In addition to supporting independent Black-owned media and helping us to keep the podcast going, you also get a weekly bonus episode, so some extra content, extra Carys and Gary. You get access to the Over Under WhatsApp community, so that's for all Patreon supporters. It's a very fun community. Occasionally, Gary and I join in the chat. And you get a weekly newsletter.
We are a Black-owned small indie up against the likes of the BBC and Murdoch, people with far more resources, far more clout. We're trying to do something different. We want to do it right. So we think the best way to do that is to call on those who support our editorial to see if they will support us functionally. That will keep us honest and real. So thank you in advance.
Going to start under the radar for this week. What do you think about when I say Peter Thiel?
I think git, but I don't know why.
I like the idea that your brain is just like categorized into like two camps of people. There's just like one part of your brain that just has a label gits. So first and foremost, he is a tech billionaire. Listeners may not know, I don't even know if you know, Gary. For a period, I had a bit of an obsession with various of the tech billionaires. You know, like reading books about them, getting annoyed that they're being touted as geniuses when they're actually just like wealthy people who made more money, getting concerned about their politics and how much it shapes the media we consume. I haven't been that obsessed with Peter Thiel, but basically he made his money primarily with PayPal, which I'm sure you've heard of. He was an early investor in Facebook, was a board member at Facebook. He acquired Elon Musk's company X.com when it was at PayPal, so worked with Elon Musk. He's a libertarian. He is technically an immigrant, which is relevant when we get into his politics. He was not born in the United States. And the reason I think he's going a bit under the radar this week is he is probably the biggest financial backer of JD Vance, or Vance, if I was American, who has just been named as Donald Trump's running mate and is reasonably likely to become the vice president of the United States. The reason I think Peter Thiel's going under the radar is he gave, I mean, most estimates suggest $15 million to get JD Vance into the Senate. JD Vance is like not even subtly a pretty big Peter Thiel fanboy. So he talks about seeing him speak when he was at Yale Law School, and it was this transformative moment. Sidebar trivia about Peter Thiel. He's read The Lord of the Rings at least 10 times. He's really into The Lord of the Rings. A lot of his companies are named after The Lord of the Rings. So there's one called Palantir. So when JD Vance set up his first investment firm, he graduates, also goes into sort of VC tech investing. He also names it after like something from the Lord of the Rings. So, they got a bit of a little nerdy thing going on. And yeah, I guess Peter Thiel, I think, is the person behind the scenes who's wielded a lot of influence to get this JD Vance pick. He's a big Trump donor. But I also think we need to pay attention to it because with Peter Thiel comes a raft of kind of Silicon Valley libertarian tech bros who are backing JD Vance for a reason.
So what is the reason? What does JD Vance give them that nobody else can give them?
My guess would be a backer. It's hard to be completely sure because JD Vance's political career is so much shorter than most other people. He doesn't have a congressional voting record. And in the interest of balance, he has in the past been complimentary to Lena Khan, who is the very anti-big tech chair of the FTC. She's a young woman of color who wrote a thesis about Amazon and antitrust. So she's anti-big tech. She was given a job by Biden, and JD Vance has praised her approach to competition law. But my guess is they're paying for access and liberalization of markets. And this should worry us because we're entering another crucial era for like technology and tech regulation powered by AI. And if the people sat at the top table have been bought and paid for by right-wing libertarian Silicon Valley types who are also their mates, then the rest of us need to be pretty worried. So that's Peter Thiel.
I think the fact that JD Vance may have praised Ms. Khan in the past, he also called Donald Trump America's Hitler in the past.
Yeah, he's a fluid guy,
And frankly, a bit of an idiot. I don't know if you saw him saying the first Islamist country with a nuclear weapon was Britain now that Labour had won, which, for the love of God, man, shut up.
I saw that. And then obviously, it did the rounds because what the British media love to do is find a UK angle in an international story. I think even if it was a joke, it was a shit one. If it wasn't a joke, but yeah, I think the point about Trump is interesting. Sidebar, the first sort of peace summit between JD Vance and Donald Trump, brokered by Peter Thiel. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's a little bit worrying, isn't it? How quickly JD Vance's opinions can change.
I read his book, Hillbilly Elegy.
Any good?
No, it's shit. And the reason being, he has what is actually a fairly standard working class upbringing. And so he comes away from that experience as a working class kid, white kid who goes to Yale, to say not so much we need to think about why this would be so rare. Why is my story even worth telling from this neighborhood, from this community? Why is it remarkable that a kid from this community should go to this university? Doesn't that speak about inequality? But instead does the kind of like, if I can do it, anybody, I
think it also shows how the media is really open to identity politics. If it's like a white identity politics, that was kind of his brand, right? He's talking about identity, like white working class identity. But you never heard anyone be like, oh, well, why going on about identity politics, JD Vance?
There's also this irritating fact of life, really, that the more powerful your identity is, the less likely it is to be considered an identity at all. Nobody ever asked me, when did you realize you were straight? Or when you were a correspondent doing a lot of traveling, how did you balance that with having a young child? Because men don't get asked that question. When white people do this kind of thing, it's not understood as identity politics. It's just a story. The other thing that's interesting about identity politics to me is the way in which, when it comes to people other than white men, then class is always absent. When it comes to white men, it's usually kind of central.
To take it back to Peter Thiel, my sense is American politics is very powered by and very reliant on money. There's a lot of money in American politics. You need money to get elected by and large. But yeah, he's a scary guy. He has paid a lot of money, not only to get JD Vance into elected office, but also has done a lot of work lobbying to get him in the VP seat. or the potential VP seat. And I think we should be worried about it and we should be paying attention to it. So that's my under, Gary.
My over the top is political violence. I mean, this is the week that there was that attempted assassination on Donald Trump, which of course brings it to the fore. And people talk about the serious threat of political violence, and they talk about degrading political discourse and what that means. And they talk about it in the media very fearfully. Now, of course, first of all, political violence is very important. You can't elect people to their death. Joe Cox, who was murdered by a fundamentalist white nationalist, David Amos, who was murdered by an Islamic fundamentalist, the hate mail that Diane Abbott gets. Political violence is a very important thing. So I want to acknowledge its importance. I then want to talk about the climate that creates political violence, right? So what we don't want to ever get into is a point where we say, well, Donald Trump had it coming. Never want to be there. And Trump absolutely contributed to a atmosphere of political violence. He advocated people getting beaten up at his rallies, even when it turned out that the person was actually one of his supporters and that people didn't know. He talked about Hillary Clinton being schlonged, as well as kind of being sexually violent or at least aggressive. And that's true when it comes from Trump's words or Jess Phillips and her saying, I told Diane Abbott to fuck off. It could be an imam. It doesn't matter. These things start with a climate that is created through speech. We can't just take the point at which something, it's a bit like only understanding racism as people saying the N-word or shouting abuse, that actually there's a context and there's a climate for this stuff. And if I think about some of the ways in which, say, Corbyn was described, I would think about it contributing to a climate of political violence. And also, if I think about the way that the Gaza conversation has gone, then there is this weird thing where people who are actually supporting violence and supporting murder and genocide circle it back and say, look at those people talking smack to me while I'm trying to murder these people. These people are using bad words. It's not an excuse for using bad words or intimidation, but we have to understand this thing in the whole.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that you're over the focus on the acts of violence because you want the conversation to be about what creates the culture of violence and the climate. And I would agree with you on that. I think the thing that stands out to me is, especially in America, because of the debate around gun control, there's like a playbook of what happens when there is an act of gun violence. Obviously, this one was a bit different. I do need to sidebar to a previous episode where you mentioned that Trump had started using the Black Power fist. He did, after being shot, very strikingly use the Black Power fist. And that image, I think, is going to go around the world quite a lot. So he may have stolen it, Gary.
Do you think he might be black?
I don't think he is black. That is just a tan. Yeah, I think, so I'm with you. There's this playbook of what happened. Everyone condemns violence, condemn the violence, condemn the violence. And then you do a deep dive into the shooter, even though there's lots of studies saying that if you focus too much on the shooter, you can encourage other shooters. And then everyone's been really frustrated because this guy didn't publish a manifesto or, at least write a long rant on Facebook that we could all dissect. We can and we should talk about the thing. The thing is an event, it is news, but we're then incapable of the real conversation, which is how we ended up at the point where we see the assassination attempts, the people who managed to fire a shot, but we don't see the hundreds and thousands of death threats of violence. Why are these happening? And what's causing it? What's driving it?
And also just who are the primary victims of this context, which is, for the most part, is black women or black people that not long ago, Germany's first Africa-born MP, Karamba Diaby, resigned and cited the levels of racial animus that he was receiving as being part of that reason. If you look at the abuse that comes Ilhan Omar's way or some of the other female congressional delegation of the squad, if you look at what is coming through Diane Abbott's inbox or Sadiq Khan's inbox, then those are the primary recipients of the threats of political violence.
Our conversations don't have the sophistication to recognize that that is part of a spectrum, that the threats and the harassment and the hate speech are part of a spectrum that leads to actual violent acts. It's not just high profile people like Sadiq Khan, who has to have levels of security that no other mayor of London has ever had to have. Like Boris and Ken did not need the levels of security that he has because of the death threats and the credible threats of violence. I would go even further and say, if we see violence as a spectrum, you know, like for women, from street harassment through to physical violence, who are the people who get harassed on the street, get beaten up, who aren't high profile? Like, political violence is terrible and it's a horrible part of our democracy, American democracy, because it's restricting and like capping the kind of people that want to get involved in politics. And also when someone like Boris Johnson compares Muslim women to letterboxes, we do see an uptick in hate speech, street harassment, sometimes actual physical harassment of Muslim women. And like, that is the real conversation. I agree with you.
Yes, this is a problem. Political violence is a problem, and it's a problem because of the violence that goes towards politicians. It's also a problem because of the kind of violence that comes out of politics into the rest of the world. So we have to understand political violence in the round. And the reason for me that it's over the top is not because they're talking about it, because they're talking about it in such a limited way. And the final point really for me is that because of that, the issue of political violence can be leveraged in the same way that racism is important, and there's the words and the threats, and then there's the actual violence, and it's all important. But that we saw with Diane Abbott how racism can be leveraged for political gain. You got Labour not allowing her to stand, but sending out mailers saying, isn't it terrible how you're using her? We've seen, I don't think this should be controversial to say, I've just said it about racism, we've seen that the issue of anti-Semitism can be leveraged, which makes people deeply cynical about the accusation of racism, deeply cynical about accusations of anti-Semitism, when both things are incredibly important. And once again, you can see political violence being leveraged for political gain. I'm not just talking about Donald Trump here, I'm also talking about the number of Labour MPs or prospective Labour MPs who refused to do hustings, claiming that they were worried about their personal safety. And I think your personal safety is important. I'm not sure that in all of those cases, actually a case was made. I think some of them did not want to subject themselves to scrutiny. My under the radar is Hurricane Beryl. Hurricane Beryl wreaked havoc in the Caribbean earlier this month in July. It hit Barbados, so it didn't hit Barbados as hard as other places, St. Vincent, Grenadines, Jamaica, and elsewhere. But it really did a number. It was Category 5, Category 4 hurricane. It really did trash a lot of places. There are a couple of reasons why it's important. First of all, there's a devastation. In fact, it was barely covered in the media. Secondly, is the impact of kind of climate change on these small islands. I interviewed Mia Mottley, who's the Prime Minister of Barbados, who really was the queen of one of the COP conferences, quite brilliant.
She's great on social media as well.
Yeah. She was speaking about climate change, and she said, our colonial masters used to recite a poem about hurricane season. June too soon, July stand by, August a must, September remember, October all over. And she said, well, guess what? May and November are now in the poem and they ain't got no words for it. This is the earliest that there has been a hurricane of this scale. These are small islands for which something like a hurricane can be absolutely devastating. It can take years to recover. And then Britain, which is where we live, has responsibility. It's not just Britain, because it's a global problem, but because of the colonial legacy, because of the Industrial Revolution and what came afterwards, and our kind of massive, the significant degree to which we have contributed to, disproportionate degree to which we have contributed to climate change, and the fact that post-colonially absolutely did a runner. So you look at, in terms of investment and basically returning some of the wealth and resources that were stolen under slavery and colonialism. But you look at somewhere like Cuba, which is so much better set up for hurricanes.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Well, because it's a socialist country and a hurricane is a public disaster, and so it needs public infrastructure, and they have it.
Shelters or better buildings? Or
Yeah. So I was in the States for Hurricane Katrina, and it was a privatized response to a public disaster. That's why it was so terrible, that if you didn't have a car, you couldn't get out. If you didn't have any money, you couldn't go to a motel. It came at the end of the month. Some people were waiting to get paid. You can't actually have a private response to a public disaster like that. And the weaker the public infrastructure, the harder it becomes.
It's definitely it's one of those weird things where social media, and I think this is like a people of color thing, where suddenly mainstream media and your social media really diverge. So yeah, there was a period where WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, you're hearing loads about Hurricane Beryl, and then you switch on most news channels or you look at a newspaper and you don't hear about it at all. To give one example, there's someone in the Over Under WhatsApp community who has family in the Caribbean, because the Over Under community are amazing. There was lots of people being like, have you managed to get hold of your family? Are they okay? And then similarly, like videos on Instagram and stuff. Yeah, it's one of those times when you really feel like certain people don't get to be news, because for a lot of us, I'm not from the Caribbean, but it was impacting our families and people we cared about. And then, we just really weren't hearing about it. And love me and Motley for many reasons, but that trying to draw the connections between climate change and colonialism, I think is pretty important. But we're talking about something that affected millions of people.
Yeah, and there is a benefit for those who were affected by Hurricane Beryl. It's on the 21st of July. It is in London, Kingsway. There'll be a special appearance from Beverly Knight. There will be other comedians and singers and performers. So if you're in London, if you're in and about, I would encourage you to do that. We're not entirely hopeless and helpless. Of course, it has global implications. We are moaning about the weather here.
The great British tradition.
Because it is a great British tradition, but it's also getting a bit boring, because each year it kind of gets worse and more unpredictable. But this is a global problem that will hit the smallest and the weakest first. Anybody who says they're interested in issues of migration, they should be on it like a bonnet, because if your home's been devastated, you've got to live somewhere.
Yeah. Well, thanks for picking that as your under. And we'll put a link in the show notes, and we'll post on the Over Under social media about ways you can donate to support victims of Hurricane Beryl. Yeah, even talking about the weather is political, right? It's all connected, Gary.
So what is your over the top?
My over the top is the Ambani wedding. Now, it's going to slightly fall flat if you don't know what the Ambani wedding is, but I feel like we're getting a lot of coverage. So if you don't know what the Ambani wedding is, you have probably seen a picture of someone rich and famous dressed for an Indian wedding. So basically, the Ambani family, very wealthy family. And that Ambani is the youngest son of Mukesh Ambani, who is the richest man in Asia. He owns a big conglomerate called Reliance Industries. It's a lot of oil, gas. They own Hamleys, but that sort of, it's such a big mega super corp that they own cricket teams and have deals with Disney. So billionaires, mega rich, youngest son getting married to another wealthy young lady. And as you know, Gary, I bloody love a wedding. Also love an Indian wedding. There's loads of components to it and excellent fashion. But I'm a bit over most mainstream media outlets turning into Hello magazine for the wedding of the son of a billionaire.
Why?
2 reasons. Number one, and I would say it's a bit of a theme of the stuff I bring to the podcast, I really hate how we just talk about billionaires like these magical celebrities or major royals who are so interesting and fascinating. They're rich people who, broadly speaking, exploited a bunch of working class people to amass an amount of money that they don't need and shouldn't be allowed to keep. So the idea that the son of a billionaire, who, to be honest, could afford billboard advertising of his wedding, he could pay to broadcast pictures of him and his bride. And it's a 6-month long extravaganza. There are many components to the wedding. I would say, I think even for an Indian wedding, they're doing a lot. Rihanna performed at one stage, Justin Bieber, Backstreet Boys. I don't think we should be giving free PR to rich people getting married. There's better things we could be doing. We could be scrutinizing their companies. We could be looking at the deal that Mark Zuckerberg, one of the wedding guests, I think he was at a pre-party, did to get access to Indian markets with Reliance Industries. But no, instead we're looking at like Kim Kardashian in a pretty dress. I love celebrity gossip and I love pretty dresses. I just resent billionaires getting all these column inches. I can't think of a media outlet, like a sort of serious media outlet, that hasn't covered it. I don't like giving billionaires stuff for free. They got enough stuff. So that's number one. Number two, because this family, like many wealthy families, has a lot of political connections. So like Modi has been at the wedding, a lot of Indian infrastructure. So like we're talking roads being shut down, but also an airport, which like is not a private thing, being sort of used because so many foreign luminaries are flying in. The thing that annoys me is like that stuff is really concerning. But instead what we get is this like, I think it's a bit Orientalist. Like I think it's a bit sketch. This like, are these celebrations appropriate in a country like India where so many are so poor? Is it appropriate to spend, we don't know the exact amount, but like rumors are like $600 million. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry. It's actually not appropriate to spend $600 million on a wedding in any country. It's not about it being in India. It's not about inequality in India. Global inequality is an issue. Poverty is an issue globally. Like when you look at the guest list and see the guest list, because we get to see so many pictures of this wedding, which, I mean, does look amazing. You would expect that for $600 million. So you've got all your celebs, you've got your Kardashians, you've got your like Rihannas who are performing, but then you've got Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, I believe the Clintons were maybe at a pre-ceremony, Tony Blair, Natch. The thing that pushed me over the edge was a video on Instagram of Boris Johnson dancing with Carey and the children he's had with Carey at the wedding. You don't have to believe in the Illuminati or the Freemasons or whatever to just be like, this wedding is also a political event and it's also about power. I'm sure I hope it's also about love. I hope the couple are very in love and I hope they're very happy together. This thing of using the wedding also to position yourself and your family and your companies. Yeah, that kind of, they are all pals, and this like blending of like the super rich and the super famous and like all these political leaders. Like, I don't like it, Gary. I don't like they're all hanging out together.
I can hear that. It's a good over. And it's also an interesting over because some people will be like, what wedding? And other people will be like, that bloody wedding. One of the things that interests me, there are a few things. First is, it's interesting about when things can be an inconvenience and when they can't. Rich and royal weddings, well, you know what? You can't drive there. You can't do that. This and everybody's
this
like,
airport is commandeered.
Yeah. There is that interesting thing that goes on about like, because it's like a meat eater in an abattoir, isn't it? It's like I am a meat eater, and that kind of so long as you're far enough away from the abattoir, you can just taste the steak. It's fine for us to have these global inequalities, you know, that distance that exists, but somehow it's really wrong to do it like in the place. And it's like, well, the inequalities are there. The inequalities are there for all to see, and we are part of those inequalities. All of the kind of conspiracy stuff, this shit is out in the open. They're conspiring in plain sight. It doesn't mean they're not doing backroom deals as well. It's not a secret.
Naomi Klein's written a really good book about internet rabbit holes and conspiracy theories called Doppelganger that I recommend people read if they haven't. As Naomi Klein says in her book, the conspiracy is capitalism. Like, it's not, we don't need to invent a whole thing about a pizza restaurant and pedophiles. Like, yeah, rich and powerful people live different lives to us, have access to a whole range of privileges that we don't. I mean, I wasn't present at your wedding, but I'm guessing that airports weren't commandeered and roads weren't closed so that you could get married.
I did recommend it, but it
didn't happen.
Yeah, Chicago O'Hare Airport just They just stayed
They were
open.
like, no.
I took it as a mark of disrespect.
And it was. Gary remembers. He'll never forget Chicago O'Hare Airport.
Yeah, I couldn't shut down a single road.
Yeah, so that thing of like, most conspiracy theories, they don't do much for me because I'm like, I don't know that we need to do all this times 8 carry the 1. Like, I think just what is happening is bad. And yeah, the idea that the wedding is particularly distasteful in India. I'm not saying that poverty is the same in every country, but like, we're in a situation where a lot of people who work have to go to food banks in order to be able to live and feed their families. I don't think that it would be cool to have the wedding here, but not in Mumbai. Like, again, that's a kind of like thing where we try to other countries and say, oh, it's like, well, American racism, I mean, that's terrible. We don't have it here. And it's just like, grow up, guys. We're deeply unequal. We've got loads of poor people and loads of rich people with too much money. Yeah, I guess I want more about the Ambani family, how they're making their money, the deals they're doing with like politicians, people like Mark Zuckerberg, less about the wedding. You know, like they've got, put it on your Instagram, do it in Hello, but do we need it in the FT or BBC? I think not.
I guess that's the point, isn't it? Is that it's not like there aren't other places that might cover this stuff. So to what extent is this a story for the rest of us? If you want it, go to Hello. That's what they do. I've written for Hello before, you know.
Okay, we need to hear about that one time. What did you write about? Princess Diana?
I wrote about Zimbabwe, and I can't explain to you why they wanted me to write about Zimbabwe, but they did, and I did.
Why Zimbabweans?
It was about what was going on in Zimbabwe. I'd just come back from covering Zimbabwe, and
Lower light, we want to
it's not an article that I'm in any way ashamed of. It wasn't like, you know, what will you be wearing to the land appropriation?
Colonial white.
There's a place for these articles. If the mainstream media are going to cover them, then the only way that they should meaningfully be covering them is with some kind of critique.
This actually connects to where we began the podcast. The real thing that sticks in my craw.
Oh, what a craw you have.
I know, what a craw. My craw is stuck. I actually don't know what that metaphor means. I shouldn't have used it. The thing that really grinds my gears is really rich people getting more free stuff. No more free stuff for the Ambanis. No more free PR. If they want people to know about their wedding, they can pay a photographer or take out an advert or be in the wedding section. No more free stuff for Ambanis. More free stuff for Carys. Buy Carys and Gary pints and do not publicize the Ambani wedding. Although I wish the couple well. I hope they are very happy together. And I don't know where they're going on honeymoon, but I hope it's lovely. Pay your workers.
Thanks for listening to Over the Top and Under the Radar. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And make sure that you sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com.
And if you want to support the show, find us by searching Over the Top, Under the Radar on Patreon. If you like us and you have the money, then put your money where your ears are and support us.
And if you don't have the money to support us on Patreon, don't worry. There are other ways to support us. You can follow us on social media at over_under_pod_. Or you could share the podcast with a friend and, you know, grow the community, get more listeners. However you can help, very much appreciated. And thank you for listening.